What is in my hair? Ugh, how long has that been there? You guys gotta tell me these things. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime, baby! Oh, Crue Trime? Yeah, Crue Trime. My name is Sarah, and what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day and put on my makeup at the same time. So if that sounds like fun to you, you are in the right place. Make sure that you subscribe to this channel, and then that way you will never miss one of my terrible stories. So today's terrible story is one that you may have seen pop up in your feed recently because the trial recently wrapped up, so it's very fresh. I have actually intentionally avoided all of the details and coverage of this case, except for what I could gather from the headlines, so I'm ready to dive in. Just for you. This is the story of Sarah Boone. The winter is wintering right across my face. My skin is very angry. Poor me. In the early afternoon hours of February 24th, 2020, sheriff deputies from Orange County, Florida responded to the Winter Park home of 43-year-old Sarah Boone. She had called 911 to report that she discovered her boyfriend, 42-year-old Jorge Torres, unresponsive and not breathing. Sarah said that she and George had spent the previous evening together at home doing jigsaw puzzles and art and, just enjoying each other's company. At one point, they were feeling kind of silly, so they decided to play hide and seek. So George had decided to hide in a suitcase, and Sarah thought it was so funny that he fit in there, so she actually zipped him up into it. But later on, she fell asleep. And then when she woke up the next morning, she came downstairs and didn't see George anywhere. Oh my God, he must still be in the suitcase. So she unzipped it and found George. Unresponsive, unconscious, not breathing. And she called 911 right away. Girl, hide and seek in a suitcase? This story's gonna be a doozy. So, who the hell is Sarah Boone? Who? I'm glad you asked. Sarah Catherine Paulson was born on October 10th, 1977 in Atlanta, Georgia to Karen and John Paulson. Karen and John had been married for about 5 years when little Sarah was born. They already had a son, Tyler, and then later they welcomed another son they named Philip. So Sarah was the middle child, middle daughter. It was like a sister sandwich. The family later moved from Atlanta to Orlando in 1981, and a couple years later, Karen and her father actually went into business together, opening High-Tech Glass Coverings Incorporated. I looked and looked to see what the heck this company was. I think it's some kind of maybe powder coating business, like paint, auto stuff. I don't know. There's not a whole lot of information about Sarah's childhood. It's pretty unremarkable. Average, normal. Sarah was a good student. Earned straight A's, She was happy-go-lucky. Her parents were pretty engaged. She graduated from Edgewater High School in Orlando. Some reports say that she went on to study nursing, but I don't think that's true. I'm not so sure that she pursued any kind of real career. I think it was just jobs, general jobs. And she was living at home with her folks. In 1998, Sarah met 23-year-old Brian Boone. They dated for quite a while before they got married in 2003-ish. Things were going pretty well for them. They had a beautiful home on the east side of Orlando with a swimming pool. In 2009, they welcomed a baby boy they named Lucas. Although Brian and Sarah seemed pretty happy, things were not perfect. Sarah had always been a drinker, no big deal. But over the years, it escalated and escalated. First, her mother got sick with cancer and died. So Sarah drank. Then her brother got into some serious legal trouble, so Sarah drank more. Her grandfather, who she was so close to, passed away. Sarah drank more. Then her father had a heart attack and died. And actually, Sarah was the one who discovered him. She drank even more. After baby Lucas was born, you would think that that would have set her on a more serious, responsible type of path. She had needed to be alert to care for this baby, but no. Opposite. Sarah actually fell into full blast alcoholism. So this obviously put a strain on her relationship with Brian. Sarah was not like a silly, happy drunk. She would cross into this territory where she was mean and physically aggressive, violent even. Now she was a pretty petite person, 100 pounds, small frame, so she wasn't necessarily a physical threat, but she would smack and punch, kick, stretch, and scratch. So they actually separated a couple times, and Brian and Sarah tried to save their marriage through counseling, but despite their efforts, it wasn't a healthy situation for anyone, especially their son. So Brian filed for divorce, and the marriage dissolved around 2015. After the divorce, Sarah stopped working completely and was getting by on alimony from Brian. In early 2017, Sarah started a romantic relationship with a man named Jorge Torres. Now, his name was George, like with a J, like Jorge, but Sarah pronounced it George throughout this story, so that's how I'm gonna say it. So Jorge Torres and Sarah Boone's relationship was toxic, to be polite. So on top of their extreme alcohol abuse, as witnessed by friends and family and neighbors, they were also physically violent with each other. In one report, Sarah's landlord actually told the police that George and Sarah would sometimes be like blackout, stumbling drunk by like 9 o'clock in the morning, walking around half dressed, fighting with each other. Just not a good scene. George was arrested multiple times for instances of domestic violence against Sarah, and she was arrested for one instance of domestic violence against George. In July of 2018, Sarah and George were both arrested. Sarah was charged with battery and strangulation, although that charge was later dismissed. And neither one of them could keep their stories straight, and they would absolutely gaslight each other and the cops and the court when it came to recalling or not recalling what had happened between them.
I don't know. Don't remember.
So George had at least 4 arrests for battery against Sarah, but each time he landed in jail, Sarah would bail him out. The point is, Sarah and George were both a problem. They both had a substance abuse problem. They both could not interact with each other in a loving, respectful way. On June 15th, 2019, the police were called to George and Sarah's home. Sarah claimed that George was pissed at her for talking to another man, and he had beat the shit out of her, telling her, quote, "You're gonna die." Police observed scratches and bumps on Sarah's face and neck, but she refused medical treatment, although she did say she would be willing to testify against him if necessary. George was arrested for battery and booked into jail, later entering into a release agreement under the condition that he stay completely sober and maintain a separate residence from Sarah and have no hostile contact with her. By September, George was arrested for violating those terms. Do you see the cycle? You see this gross cycle, this pattern of abuse. Their families didn't get along. George's family did not like Sarah. Sarah's ex-husband, baby daddy, she had to co-parent with him, did not like George at all. Like this, it was all bad. The situation was bad. This toxic relationship went on like this for like 3 years, and it was just peppered with police calls and arrests and jail time and hearings and bonds and all the rest. So, fast forward to, on the evening of February 23rd, 2020, Sarah and George were enjoying an evening at home together, painting and doing puzzles. Sarah's son, Lucas, was with his dad that evening, and after having a bottle of Woodbridge Chardonnay, Sarah and George decided to play hide and seek. Sarah hid upstairs in the shower, and when George never came upstairs to look for her, she went downstairs to look for him. Is this their first time playing hide and seek? One person has to hide and one person has to seek. That's how that works. Anyway, she could see that George had crawled into this suitcase that was sitting out in the living room because they were planning to drop it off at a donation center. She could see that he was inside it because she could see like the flap, I guess, was moving, right? Because he was inside it. So ha ha ha, isn't this funny? She zips him up in it. The suitcase was in decent shape, but the zipper, like the pull of the zipper, the little tab was broken, so she had to use a paper clip to kind of zip it. That's part of the reason that she was donating it or planning to. So around 12:30 that evening, Sarah decided she was going to head up to bed, expecting George to get himself out of the suitcase, no problem, and then, come up and join her. So she laid down in the bed and fell asleep.
You fell asleep?
She woke up the next morning and just sort of like laid in the bed for a time. Like she was awake, but just, rotting. As you do. And she could hear her cell phone ringing downstairs. And she knew it was probably her ex-husband Brian calling to see if she was going to pick up Lucas. So she finally got out of bed like 11 or 12-ish, something like that, and went downstairs figuring that she was going to find George sitting on the couch poking around on the laptop, like looking for jobs. But he wasn't on the couch. He wasn't in the bathroom. He wasn't in the kitchen. He wasn't anywhere. Was he still in the suitcase? Well, she walked over to it, unzipped it, and found found George inside unconscious and not breathing. Recap. Well, Sarah didn't know what to do, so she called her ex-husband Brian, who lived maybe a 5-minute drive away, and begged him to please come over. George was dead. She needs help. What do I do, right? So once Brian arrived and saw George, he told Sarah to call 911. So she did, and then while she was waiting for them to show up, she went out back and had a cigarette. And now we're back to the beginning of the story. So the sheriff's deputies show up, and she tells them the story that I told you earlier, and then she also gave the deputies permission to go through her cell phone. After a digital forensic investigator got their hands on it, they found 2 videos that told a different story of what happened the night George got into the suitcase. So in both of these videos, and I'll show them, George is already in the suitcase and it's already zipped up. You can't see him, but you can hear his voice and you can hear Sarah's voice.
Sarah, I can't breathe, babe. Seriously.
He's begging her to let him out. And what did Sarah say in response?
Sarah.
You.
Sarah.
Stupid.
Yeah. She laughed. She was laughing because remember, it's so funny that grown man George could fit inside this suitcase. But that's not all she said.
I can't breathe, babe.
Oh, that's what I feel like when you ching on me.
Sarah.
We know that their relationship was garbage and they were horrible to each other. But this is like next level. The man cannot breathe and Sarah sounds perfectly calm, smug, pleased with what's going on.
Sarah.
That's my name. Don't wear it up.
She also sounds drunker than Cooter Brown.
Real or ransom. Might want to get video for it extra.
We now know that Sarah's ex-husband, Brian, started calling her cell phone around 10:30 in the morning. It was her day to pick up their son Lucas from school, but Sarah wasn't generally reliable. Now, according to Sarah, she said that sometimes she would be unavailable because she was on job interviews, which is not true. She was just hungover or presently drunk. So Brian always called to see if she was going to be able to do what she's supposed to do, and she often wasn't. So Brian actually wasn't able to get through to Sarah until just before 1 o'clock. He was calling her. She didn't call him. So when she finally picked up from Brian's calls, she was freaking out. You know, George was dead and please come over. Brian told her, call the police. And when he arrived, he saw what was going on, like took 2 steps into the apartment, went no further, went out back to his car to wait for the police. When she was talking with the police, there's this body-worn camera footage. Sarah shows absolutely no emotion.
So how long were you doing CPR on him prior to you calling 911? You tried that all morning?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I called him while I was
What
doing
time
CPR.
did you...
For somebody who just discovered their boyfriend of 3 years dead, she's remarkably composed.
You zipped him in there?
Yes.
Thought he would be funny, a little
It
joke?
was. We both were laughing about it.
And let me be clear, like, I'm not above silliness. No, nobody is. In fact, I recall my adult cousin hiding inside a big duffel bag when we were on vacation in Sonoma like 2 summers ago. If I had zipped her up into that thing and then she died, I would be inconsolable, especially in the immediate relaying of what happened. But that's not at all the demeanor of Sarah Boone.
I fell asleep
When did you do CPR?
this morning when I found him.
Before you called?
Yes.
Do you see any tears?
He's in the suitcase still. And that's when I found him and I took him out and I tried doing CPR and then I called him and then I called you guys.
No tears. Maybe a little bit of an elevated demeanor, but then quickly back to a very matter-of-fact, flat tone. Not crying, dead boyfriend. Side note, in the body-worn camera footage, Sarah is very worried about having a cigarette.
I had a cigarette lit. I really need something to drink.
Okay,
I got my Dr. Pepper on the counter.
okay, we'll take care of you. Give me 1 second.
She repeatedly asked this like angel of a person, sheriff's deputy, to like get her cigarettes from inside the house, or does anybody have a cigarette? Can she find some cigarettes and bring them to her? Girl. So the investigators, when they spoke with Sarah, they asked multiple times if George had any kind of underlying medical conditions at all, and she said no. He doesn't take any medicine, he hasn't had any doctor's appointments, he's not complained about anything, no hospitalizations, nothing. But then she does tell the investigators that she's afraid for her life.
I want you to know that. I am afraid for my life. His family have never liked me. I'm the blue-eyed white devil, is what they call me. They're down the road. They're going to kill me.
What? Remember when I said that George's family didn't really care for Sarah? Well, it's when she realizes that they're gonna get the news that George is dead in her apartment, and she started to get scared. Also, the story of George in the state of his health does evolve a little bit.
I don't know if he suffocated or like had an aneurysm or a heart attack or
What kind of medical conditions does he have?
None that I know of.
Sarah starts out saying she doesn't know if he's got any conditions, he doesn't take any medicine, blah, 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 blah. But then later she says something about like his teeth bothering him or him losing his teeth, and maybe that was connected, and maybe he had an aneurysm or a stroke or something. So on February 25th, Sarah drove herself to the Orange County Sheriff's Office for a follow-up interview with investigators. And at some point, the investigators questioned her about the videos that they found on her phone. I mean, initially they asked her, do you have any videos on your phone that were taken that night? And she's like, no.
No videos on Sunday. Not that I'm aware of.
I might have taken a picture of my dog, but that's it. Okay, well, they found these videos. So Sarah's story was that she denied intentionally leaving George in the suitcase. This was all just a terrible accident, right?
But why is he saying I can't breathe, and why is he pushing on it as if he can't get out?
But she couldn't justify why she left him in there and then just went to bed.
I don't know what you want me to tell you. Like, I don't know, like, what you want me to tell you.
I'm just telling you what we see.
Remember also, she had told the police that she and George had shared a bottle of wine. They were not drunk.
All we had was a bottle of wine. Literally, just a bottle of wine.
But then when she couldn't think of a reason why she would have just left George in the suitcase and gone up to bed and fallen asleep, she started blaming the drinking.
It's alcohol. Alcohol is a shitty thing. I'm blaming it on the wine.
Well, these police detectives really held Sarah's feet to the fire, painted her into a corner, whatever turn of phrase means that they weren't going to let her get away with this bullshit baloney story. Bottom line, Sarah Boone never denied having been the one to zip Jorge Torres up in that suitcase. So she was responsible that he died inside of it, and she was later arrested for the second-degree murder of Jorge Torres. So when you look at these two videos, it's noticeable that the position of the suitcase changes. The first video began recording at around 11:12 p.m. and it's about 2 minutes long. There's just Sarah slurring along and George just trying to get her to let him out of the suitcase. The suitcase is facing downward, like it'd been pushed over on top of the flap that would open. You can see George kind of like pushing from inside the suitcase, trying to get out of it. And the second video starts recording about 11 minutes later, and it's about 20 seconds long. And this time the suitcase is now facing upward. So when the first responders got to Sarah's apartment to assess the scene, George was found lying near the door of the apartment next to the suitcase. They noted that he had a small laceration on his lip and what appeared to be some bruising around his eye. He also had long scratches, like from fingernails, on his back, a large scratch on his neck, abrasions on his hands, contusions to his left shoulder, injuries to his head consistent with blunt force trauma. Had he and Sarah been in some kind of physical altercation before he got into that suitcase? I mean, their history of physical violence certainly suggests that something happened other than a silly game of hide and seek. So there's a lot of things that could have happened that evening, a lot of different versions, and we'll get to what is said at the trial, but if you're asking me, I think at one point he was zipped up in this suitcase. I think Sarah might have pushed it down the stairs, or Sarah might have pushed the suitcase around a bunch. I'll get to that later. There's also some chatter about a baseball bat. She might have been hitting the suitcase. Who knows? So Sarah's arrested, right? And now she's in jail awaiting trial. Sarah wrote many, many letters to the judge in the case. And to her credit, she has lovely penmanship. But the actual content of the letters is cuckoo. It's a lot. Basically, she's, tired of waiting, tired of being jerked around by the legal system, thinks that she's being treated unfairly and unconstitutionally. And when you're arrested and waiting for trial, most people feel like that. Am I right? Anywho, Sarah actually was so impossibly insufferable that she had a very difficult time retaining legal counsel. She went through 8 different lawyers for various reasons. Sarah actually had asked the judge at one point to dismiss one of the lawyers after that lawyer had asked to withdraw from the case at least 3 times. Another one had previously represented George in a domestic violence case. One had previously worked with somebody else connected to George or to Sarah. Most of these lawyers actually quit because of conflicts or irreconcilable differences. Basically, Sarah was a menace. Just before the case went to trial, the judge actually ruled that Sarah had forfeited her right to court-appointed counsel, and she was approved to represent herself pro se. And we all know how well that usually works out.
I'm not stupid.
But at the 11th hour, somebody agreed to represent her, so the trial was ready to roll. But then Hurricane Milton. Well, Sarah's trial finally got underway on October 14th, 2024. Sarah's story of an innocent game of hide and seek turning into a terrible accident started to change. This long history of violence, and specifically George's violence against her, was brought into the case. Basically, Sarah was pursuing this battered woman's syndrome defense. She said that yes, this game of hide and seek did begin innocently. George had hidden himself in the suitcase, and then Sarah found him and zipped him up in it. Ha ha ha, so funny. Apparently the joke had gone on a little too long, and suddenly the prospect of George getting out of the suitcase became concerning. Like, what was he gonna do to her once he got out of it? Beat the shit out of her? Kill her? I mean, it kind of proves the point that maybe him being zipped up in the suitcase wasn't part of this game, and it was not so funny, but anyway. So now Sarah's afraid, and when George was attempting to escape from the suitcase, poking his fingers out of the small hole where the zippers meet, he was trying to get himself out of it, and she started shaking and pushing the suitcase around so that he would retract his hands inside. Then she used a baseball bat to encourage that, to poke his fingers back in. She said that she never considered that he couldn't breathe, despite him begging her to let him out for that reason. Also, if she feared for her life, for her safety in that moment, George was contained. She could have called the police for help, as she had done so many times before. But no, Sarah instead defended this behavior and the toxic relationship that she had with George and all the times that she went back to him, blah, 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 blah. The state's case was quite clear. You know, Sarah was drunk that night, and she first told the police that she and George had this 1 bottle of wine, but the truth is that she and George had shared 2 bottles of wine, but they weren't regular bottles. They were magnums. Sarah and George were big-time boozers, so they could really put it down, but they were tiny people. Tiny pocket people, okay? Like 100 pounds each. So essentially, if they had, between the 2 of them, drank 2 magnums of wine, that's 1.5 liters. That's the equivalent of 2 bottles of wine each. Also, on the evidence of this suitcase, Sarah is clearly wasted.
That's what I feel like when you drink on me.
Sarah!
And this wasn't self-defense. This was a very purposeful act to punish George. He told her he couldn't breathe, and he obviously couldn't free himself, and Sarah left him in there to die. It's pretty cut and dry. On October 25th, 2024, the jury deliberated for 2 whole hours, which, you know, that's about enough time to fill out the paperwork, and they returned a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Now, in the sentencing phase of Sarah's trial, she actually took the stand and made her own statement to the court. Her own victim impact statement. Herself the victim. She described all these terrible things that George had subjected her to or done to her. He terrorized her. He stole from her. He forced her to drink alcohol. She protected him. She covered for him. She lied for him. Very revisionist history. But she painted this very, very creative portrait of herself as this battered woman. And then she forgave him. Okay. She forgave herself for, you know, being a victim and not leaving George. She asked for forgiveness from George's family. She asked the planet for forgiveness.
I don't know what else it is that I can say and convey to the Torres family, and I hope that everyone can forgive me, the Torres family most of all, and his daughters.
She's just so sorry.
Oh, he's sorry, sorry.
You guys, this statement that she read was about 15 minutes long, and it was very well written, articulate, even eloquent. And it was a total fiction and a total insult to the court and to the victim and to common sense.
I forever will have this experience. I forever will have Jorge Torres with me in my heart, in my mind. When I leave, this is forever. When you all leave, that this is forever. This is forever for everyone here, and I am one of those who will experience this forever.
Now this part is pretty interesting. After she was done with this little statement, the judge actually asked her something about, like, does she have religion? Certainly she was brought up with some kind of religion. Like, can she turn to that now or whatever? And then, wouldn't you know it, Sarah Boone then went on this whole tirade about being bathed in the light of a loving Jesus or whatever. It's funny that someone who claims to have become so close to God, especially while in jail, didn't bother to include any of that kind of talk in her 15-minute prepared statement, but she sure had a lot to say once that judge planted the seed. This woman is an absolute narcissist, completely delusional. If you want to see all the coverage from the trial, Emily D. Baker, of course, covered every minute of it and offers incredible insight and commentary as to the craziness of the story. But at the end of it, Sarah Boone was sentenced to life in prison in the Florida Department of Corrections. And that is the story of Sarah Boone. If you want to know what makeup I used in today's look, then look down in the description box. Everything is linked. If there's something that I use that's old or unavailable, I'll find you something similar. Also, if you have a Crue Trime story that you would like to recommend to me, look down in the description box. There's a link to a Google document. You click it, fill in all the dirty details, as much or as little as you want. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on all of the other socials as well. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! Florida State Department. Nope, not state. Basically, one at their and Debbie's in the litter box. Great. More response. Fuck. Legal trouble. Pete. Pee-pee. Is that a pee-pee? Hi. Say hi. Say hi, Pete.